Hello, everyone. I'm going to be introducing Chris. I'm Paola Criscuolo. I'm the head of the Management and Entrepreneurship Department. This is where Chris sits. Although he's so busy with other activities, I'm not sure how many homes you have. Before we start, I just have to make some announcement. In case of fire, there are 4 fire exits. I feel like, in the airplane, 2 at the and 2 at the back, the assembly point is at the corner of Exhibition Road. I suppose we can start to show the video of our dean, Francisco Veloso. Unfortunately, couldn't be here. He's actually in Africa right now. But he wanted to welcome you anyhow, so maybe we can start the video by Francisco.
Welcome to Chris Tucci's inaugural lecture. Inaugural lectures are a wonderful opportunity to showcase our senior academics, learn about their journeys, their many impacts in business and society, and understand the outlook of how they're looking at their future contribution as well. And that's certainly very true for today's inaugural lecture by Chris Tucci, who's going to be speaking about embracing digital disruption and sharing his perspectives on how organizations adapt to new technologies and to all these digital elements that are having this fundamental impact in all of us and in specifically in organizations. And I would really have liked to be there with you, but I'm traveling at the moment in Africa in particular. As you're listening to this recording, I'll be in Nigeria doing some events with alumni and friends of the business school, but I still wanted to join in and participate through this video. And so let me just conclude by first congratulating Chris on his inaugural lecture, but also to thank Paola Criscuolo, the head of the department, for introducing Chris, Annabelle Gower, a professor at the University of Surrey, for doing the vote of thanks, and of course, all of you to have joined in either here in the room or remotely through a digital connection, and have a wonderful session. Thank you very much.
So before letting Chris speak, I just want to say a few words about his background. Chris is an Italo-American professor, and I want to stress this because we do share the same frustration of dealing with the Italian bureaucracy. Chris has a very interesting background. He has a degree in music, mathematics, and also a master's degree in computer science from Stanford University. Finishing his studies, he decided to join industry, and he worked for 10 years at Ford Aerospace. I actually checked whether it was the same company I was thinking about, and it was. So Ford Motor had aerospace unit at that time, no longer exists. And in that job, Chris was involved in developing internet protocols and applying artificial intelligence tools to industrial problems. After 10 years in industry, Chris decided to go back to academia, and I don't know whether this was due to his frustration, again, as an innovator in a large incumbent firm, or whether you were very much interested in learning more how to manage innovation in large corporations. So you went back to do a master in science and technology policy at MIT Sloan School, and that's also where you did your PhD. Then you started academia at NYU as assistant professor of entrepreneurship, innovation, and operation management, and then you moved to EPFL, École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, which made you closer to Italy than before. Chris spent 17 years at EPFL, and during that time, he covered several important roles, including being the dean of the College of Management of Technology for 5 years. In 2018, you visited Shanghai. You you became a visiting thought leader at CIBS in Shanghai, and then you came and visited us. At that time, there was still an innovation entrepreneurship department, so you joined our department, and then we managed to hire you. And it's delighted to have you. We're very thankful that you have accepted to join us, and you are currently a professor of digital strategy and innovation. Not only that, as I was saying before, he has several hats or several homes. You're also the director of the Digital Transformation Center, as well as the co-director of education for Imperial X. Given your background as a computer scientist and mathematician, I think you have the right skills. Chris had the right skill and the perfect profile as a scholar to both lead the center, but also to be really a boundary spanner between the business school and the rest of the college. The work that Chris has done is related to how companies leverage new technologies, how they adopt them, how they integrate and incorporate them in new processes, and product and service offering, and also how they make money from them. Chris has examined these important processes in relation to many technological disruptions, such as the internet and the first wave of artificial intelligence, and continue to do so, looking at the impact of digital disruption and the impact that they have on organizations. And this is what is basically the topic of today's lecture. This is obviously an important question. We read basically daily on newspapers about digital disruptions, and it's important not only for incumbent firms, but also for new ventures that are often the companies bringing about these disruptions. The pandemic has clearly illustrated that there is a lot of heterogeneity in the way firms can leverage this technology and profit from them. So, your lecture is going to be a way of understanding better what makes a company successful in leveraging this technology. The work you've done in open innovation, business model innovation, crowdsourcing has been instrumental in informing, I believe, your thinking about how best to deal with this new general purpose technology and how to leverage them to the benefit of an individual organization, but also to the benefit of society at large. I'm not going to take much longer in introducing Chris, because I know you have so many things to say, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm a professor in innovation management, so I already told Chris I'm going to steal some of his examples from my own lecture. So let's welcome Chris to give your inaugural lecture. As I said, I'm delighted to have you here. You are an exemplary faculty. You are very collegial, generous, and extremely dedicated member of my department. So thank you very much for being with us today and for having joined our department. And there's going to be questions after the lecture, both online and in the room. Thank you, Chris.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I think the microphone seems to be working fairly well. Welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for taking the time to come to my little lecture. As you can see here, I did this once before. It was 18 years ago. And it wasn't a total disaster. So kind of like an athlete that, that scored one goal, an amateur athlete that scored one goal in a game. I'm actually wearing the same outfit that I wore back then, 18 years ago. Now, what I'd like you to do here is take out your phone. First thing, turn the ringer off. Thank you very much. Second, let me just get some of your ideas here. What has the phone displaced, in your opinion? Like, we have these smartphones now, and so the question is, what products, services? Yes, shout them out, yes.
Ability to concentrate on anything.
Ability to concentrate, that's definitely one of the things that it's displaced.
Paper maps.
Say that again?
Paper maps.
Oh yeah, the maps. Yeah, that's an excellent one. Anything else? The faxes, yeah, the fax machine, yeah. The old, yeah, the even worse. Definitely. Yes.
Photo album.
Say it again.
Photo album.
The photo album. Oh, actually, that's a very interesting one, yeah.
MP3 player.
MP3 player, music players, yeah. calendar. Okay, so many things that we think about, when we think about digital disruption. I'm going to give you some definitions in a minute, just give you a little idea, that some of these things have been, so to get to your point about the maps. Now, we actually had paper maps. You're right, paper maps. We used to carry them around in our car, do you remember? And then we'd have to stop and, buy one because we were in a new area, So now, then eventually these things came along, and these were devices that were put into the automobile, like on the dashboard, and it would give you the turn-by-turn navigation. So it's called a GPS navigator. And this is a huge industry. As you can see here, Garmin was making in 2008, Garmin was making $2.5 billion in total turnover, total revenues, that year on selling these navigators. Okay, and as you can see, let me see, I don't know if this will work. Yeah, it's sort of dropped off relatively dramatically. Here's TomTom's revenues, and you can see here that the automotive section has, shrunk to a very, very small amount over this period of time. So it's something to motivate us in some sense to think about what's happening in these industries and how these firms responded. Here's the camera. You guys didn't mention the camera. But, we used to carry around cameras with us. Do you remember? It was back in the day. And so here, you can see that the digital camera sales have, dropped by 87%. And here's a beautiful graphic of the rise of the digital camera. So digital camera started around here, and then it really took off. And then the sale of smartphones, let's just say, started around here, 2009 or so. And as you can see, the digital cameras just, from 121 million down to 15 million. And here, we have 1.5 billion smartphones, on the market. So it's another example. And, but what you may not know, and this is a part that I think is quite interesting, is that, you look at that Garmin and you say, gosh, Garmin, what a disaster case, they don't sell any more of those navigators anymore. But actually, if you look at Garmin's total revenues, they've actually managed to grow their revenues over this period of time, while the navigators were shrinking. And there's another here from, Nikon has improved profits, even despite in the middle of this whole thing of the cameras being essentially no market for cameras anymore. And then finally, here's an example of BT, because you might have also thought that, like a lot of the data channels that we use now for voice communications, that would be very, very bad for fixed lines, and it's true that fixed line revenues have just dropped off the cliff there over the last 20 years or so. And voice over internet, voice over IP has taken off in addition to, obviously wireless. So here we have the adjusted revenues of BT Group is actually not, it hasn't dropped off the way that you might think. So I'm just trying to, think about this as a little bit of a motivational, a kind of a puzzle, for us. So here's Garmin's revenue mix. And if you look at this one is the automotive one. So indeed, you could just see it dropping dramatically. But what's been replaced by is they've actually moved quite a bit into fitness devices. And they've done very, very well in that area. And they've also, have steady business in marine, which has been growing, and also in aviation and other sorts of outdoor devices. So basically, I think that they were quite clever in that they were really oriented toward these GPS devices. And then we had something that happened, which is basically a smartphone came along and replaced all those devices, so every single person is carrying around a navigator with them. They don't need them anymore, and yet they still managed to do well, and over time actually even grow their company despite this all happening. Okay, so this is the process of reacting to digital disruption. This is the thing I want to talk about a little bit tonight. Let's start with a little discussion of creative destruction. This is a Schumpeterian idea. And Schumpeter wrote, a very famous book, called Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. And in that book, basically says, it's a process of industrial mutation that incessantly revolutionizes economic structure, from within, destroying the old one and creating a new one. And normally, we think about this as being a bad thing. Like most people think, creative destruction is bad. But actually, Schumpeter didn't intend it to be a bad thing per se. Schumpeter really thought about the creative. That's why it's not just called destruction. It's called creative destruction for a reason, because there are a lot of opportunities that are opened up by these new technologies as they come along. And it was one of the things he studied a lot over the decades. So what is disruption exactly? So to get a little bit more down into the details here. Disruption, we use the term very, very loosely. And there's a brilliant article by Lepore, if you want to read about the use and abuse of the term disruption. I suggest that you read that article. But basically, it can happen in different kind of situations. So the first one is we think about these sort of the Schumpeterian situation. A lot of people used to call this radical technological change in different ways, right? So the first one is a new technology comes along, and then what you're good at is no longer relevant anymore. People call this radical in the organizational sense. Another one is, what happens is new technology comes along and it cuts the cost. It cuts the cost so dramatically that it puts the price in the market of things based on the new technology below the cost of providing the old technology. So the people making the old technology are actually losing money, every time they sell something over time. And over time, it's considered to be a difficult situation for companies to be in. And then the third one, there's this one popularized by Christensen that talked about, that he actually used the word disruption and disruptive technology at the time to mean that there was a new technology that came along that got better over time. So at first it was inferior, but it had a new dimension. And then it slowly got better and better until at a point where it satisfied the market. And at that point, according to Christensen, then the people who were incumbents were doomed to fail. And actually, most of these have been quite negative stories in the sense that, you're kind of doomed. And that's the sense. But even though we can see many examples, and actually I wrote a whole other paper on that in management science many years ago that showed that the big disk drive companies that were used as examples in here actually didn't fail and did very, very well over time because they were able to shift into new markets and new technologies. So basically here, this is what disruption means. And so what is digital disruption then? So digital disruption is going to be looking at when the technologies are digital technologies. So the new technology, we're talking about new technologies coming along, and then some of those technologies are digital. And so when the technologies are digital, it might have the potential to disrupt things. And okay, great. Very nice. So it has the potential to disrupt things, and you can make the argument as to whether this is any worse or better than any other technological innovation that causes disruption in the market. And so I'm going to argue that, yeah, I kind of agree with that. It's a little bit nuanced, but I think you have the potential in two different dimensions here for digital technologies. One is that it could happen faster. So in the past, you might be quite a long time while something was developing, and then it comes out and it's commercialized, and all of a sudden all the competitors that are using the old technology find themselves in trouble, but they had some advance notice here. With the digital technologies, you might argue that it's a little bit quicker. You might also make the argument that it might happen that they might be more exposed to digital disruption. It's arguable. So it might be higher. Now, for radical in the organizational sense, so if the firm doesn't have any digital skills, then you find yourself in a situation where there's some digital technology that's replaced or competing with you, and all of a sudden you only have the legacy skills. So that's a bad situation to be in. So the example that I have here is the music retailers. You remember the record stores, the CD stores, and there are very, very, very few of those around these days. Because they didn't really have the digital skills to compete with downloads of digital music. Next one is, for radical in the economic sense, this is where the cost drops and the price drops below to what anybody, what you can afford to produce at. And this is the example of the GPS navigators where basically since you already have the phone, the marginal cost of you having this GPS device on you is actually essentially zero. And therefore, why should you go out and then spend an additional 100 pounds or something on a navigator? Even 20, right? So, and even then, there's like the issue of getting the traffic, blah, blah, blah. And so now that's all integrated into the phone now. So that's a GPS navigator. And for this disruptive one, an example might be you have voice over internet protocol, voice over IP services. If you all recall back in those horrible days when we all used Skype and how unreliable it was, et cetera. But, over time, I would almost say that it's just as reliable now to use, Zoom or Teams. It's not 100% reliable, and it probably isn't quite as reliable as a fixed line, but almost no one has a fixed line anymore. So, if you're actually thinking about the wireless, the cellular service, mobile services, yeah, there's plenty of distortion and noise, et cetera. So it's actually gotten to a point where it's exceeded the performance of the prior technology. So I think that might be, an example of a digital disruption in the telephony space. I'm not going to go through this list. Sometimes what I do when I'm, making different speeches in different technology areas, I'm walking through these and trying to explain, how they work. And I have, a couple of different exec classes in that area as well. But for today, I just wanted to say that, what I'm interested in here is sort of thinking about these different technologies and how they might influence the products, services, business models that are out there, in the world. And so this is just sort of like a laundry list of all the different digital technologies, but these are the things that are behind digital disruption, if you will. So the question here is, how is it the case that some of these firms are actually able to navigate this disruption process and apparently do very, very well? And so, obviously the answer is, of course, innovation. I teach innovation management. I think innovation is very interesting. So for me, I think it's a quite interesting topic. And usually we think of it in multiple parts. We usually think of it as invention plus commercialization. So you're going to come up with something new, and then you're going to put it into practice. Typically, if it's a for-profit company, you're going to launch something into the market. And if it's something else, then you're going to somehow put it into practice. So that's the idea behind, innovation management. And then eventually, which we love to think about here, is, we have this idea of appropriating benefit, or people call it value capture now. So in other words, you're going to invent something, you're going to put it into practice, and then eventually you're going to try and capture some value from that. So this is a little example of how some, of the different stages that a company would be seeing as an industry matures, right? And so the main message here is that there's a corporate innovation management function, and the goal of the corporate innovation management function is to anticipate new markets, new technologies, and new business models, to try and future-proof the company so you don't get caught in a situation where, you find yourself on the wrong end of a digital disruption. And so this basically is a little chart that Lorenzo Massa and I worked on. So this is a typical, the typical industry maturity model where you have an introductory phase where companies compete on features. They compete in the product market and in the service market on features. And then over time, there's process innovations that go on. So basically, certain things, coalesce. The market decides on they want something. Companies get bigger. They become more efficient, and they invest a lot in process innovations. And that's a very good thing. And then eventually, you may get to a maturity here. And in the mature area, the total industry sales levels off. And at this point, you may want to consider business model innovation in addition to new technological innovation. Because what kicks this whole cycle off is, new technologies come along, and then we start all over again in this sort of early immature phase of the industry life cycle. So this is kind of an example of, what should you be thinking of at different stages, and what the corporate innovation management function should do to help you, think about that. Okay, so I'm basically going to walk through a little bit of some new products, services. I'm going to throw in a few things, like some projects I'm working on, some projects I finished recently, some projects I did a little while ago, just to tell you what I'm interested in. And also to give I hope, a little insight into, what's happening here behind the scenes that the companies can think about when they are trying to attack and deal with new technology. So, so the first thing is, this is a paper that I'm working on right now, and this one is, using rugged landscapes as a metaphor for innovation diffusion, Okay, now, so rugged landscape, basically all it means is that, there are a bunch, you can think of this landscape as having peaks and valleys on it. And the peaks and valleys are determined because there's a certain number of things you can work with. There's like, imagine if you have a phone, you have certain features on your phone that you could tweak, And those are all the different dimensions that you can change when you are on this landscape. And then there's another element of this, which is called the complexity of the landscape, which is how interrelated are these features. So basically, there was things like on your phone, you could have a very long life on your phone by increasing the size of the battery. So that's good. The other problem is that would also increase the weight of the phone, which people don't like, or the footprint of the phone. I mean, you don't want to walk around. This is back in the old days. Remember the old cellular phones were like this big, and you carried them around like a brick and put them in your car, and people called them car phones. So people don't like that. So when you tweak something, it affects something else. So that's the idea here behind complexity. So the more complex you have, the more interrelationships you have between your variables that you tweak, then the more you have hills and valleys on a rugged landscape. So something that I've been using for, thinking about for many years, and how this could be designed. And so one of the things that we thought about, as I've been working with Esteve Almiron on this paper, is, how do companies, come to realize who are the best people here? What we usually say is that it's very difficult for a firm. So imagine this landscape is covered with firms, and they're all in different places, but they all want to go as high as they possibly can. That's the analogy. And so the thing is, they can't just change what they're doing. You can't just change every single thing that you're doing, because it requires new knowledge. It requires you to go out and hire new people. And maybe you lay off people that have special expertise in certain things. So you can't navigate freely and quickly along this landscape. You can only move around a little bit. And so as slowly you start climbing hills. And maybe what you're trying to do over here is trying to figure out what this person over here is doing. And this is a typical model that you have, is that we can copy the best person. And if we can copy the best person, maybe we can make some tweaks in our thing. And if the system isn't too complex, we might be able to move to a higher ground. Okay? Now, what I've been working on with Esteve here is, what if there was an institution here, like universities, business school, case studies, consultancies, et cetera, that distill these different innovations that are out there and talk about the commonalities across the highest performing companies. So it's no longer a dyadic thing. I search around for the best performer, but rather I absorb this information that's being curated for me, and then I can try and attempt to copy some elements of what they're doing. And that might get me to a higher place on the landscape. So it's a kind of an awareness building thing where you can think about how can I actually try something new and try and move to a new place, try and adopt something. So one of the mechanisms here that I was working on a very long time ago, this is on crowdsourcing. It's the same basic principle here. And this is the paper that I had with Alan Afua in 2012, is basically, so here we are in this landscape. And by the way, I should acknowledge that Anu Wadwa was really the person who suggested this whole framing, so very grateful to Anu for helping us think this through. But basically, here's the focal agent here, and this agent can only move in a very limited area around where they are because of all the frictions that I just mentioned. Then, what you have, though, is you have people all over the landscape, or companies all over the landscape, and they are in better positions. Like this one here is actually in a really good position to go up really high. And so the question is, if you had a crowdsourcing platform, you could have access to that particular agent or that particular company's knowledge, and they would help you solve the problem. So this is why we called it, crowdsourcing, making distance search into local search for any company. So we were basically trying to make the argument that now that we have more IT platforms, and now that we have crowdsourcing platforms, and all these companies are anyway all over this grid, we can gain access to the knowledge by posting on an open call and trying to get people to make suggestions for us, and even giving them a prize. And some of the prizes, are paying for themselves quite rapidly. And then it's another little paper that I've been working on here with Joana Pereira and Gigi Viscusi on sort of what you might call the governance structure of a crowd organization. So thinking about it not just from the point of view of, hey, I create a prize and this guy wins the prize. That's like a sponsored crowdsourcing exercise. And that can get you good results. But what we were trying to do here was understand, well, what if it was more scalable? What if the community itself decided what was going on. And so you could move down this list from a sponsored crowdsourcing to some kind of online community to a decentralized autonomous organization, and sort of what are some of the key elements of those things. So what is the scalability of this? What is the, could you fork? Could you actually create a new group and do your own thing in that new group? You probably can't do that with a sponsored crowdsourcing. And so, and then that could have different generativity outputs. So in other words, that could have different innovation outcomes for you. So if you really want some wild and crazy ideas, very unconventional ideas, maybe what you would do is you would kind of let the crowd determine what it wants to work on, and you try and see what they're doing. If you want a very specific narrow problem solved, then you could have your own, private LinkedIn group that you create, and you pose questions to them, and they give you answers. And this is something that, this is a connected development. There's most major corporations have crowdsourcing type platforms that they're using to try and get ideas from the outside, and they pose the questions, and they give different incentives for people to give them good solutions. So it's crowdsourcing, I think, is a very nice mechanism for companies to participate and to get some new innovation ideas that help deal with digital technologies. Here's another little paper that I had there with John Vito Lanzola, who I think, he's up here, and Danilo Pesce, who may be online. Here, we're trying to think about incorporating digital skills and digital technologies into the innovation process itself. So imagine you have innovation management function in your company, and now you digitalize that. So so basically all we were trying to do here was try and understand, how does that affect the knowledge structures that you currently have? Does it enable you to get very, very broad, which would be over here, overturning existing knowledge structures, or does it sort of force you into a more narrow but deep understanding of whatever it is that you're already doing? And then on this side, we have, does it replace your existing competencies, or does it complement your existing competencies? And so all we're doing with this paper is trying to understand, what sorts of outcomes would you expect to have here? For example, smartification, like, the classic example of your tennis shoe or your, I don't know what they're called, running shoe. Your running shoe that you have sensors built into them that give you insight into, so when you do the sensor, then it's connected to your watch or to your phone, and it gives you insight into how you're preparing and how fit you are, et cetera. And so that's a very nice example, because this could actually have a big market for it. There could be a big market for that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to, branch out into some far distant knowledge. You can just basically layer that in there. Same thing, so if over here we called it digital skunkworks, because basically your digitalization is replacing your existing competencies, and over here it's overturning your existing knowledge structures. So basically the idea is that you could set up a separate organization that you would go in, and that would be able to feed you with new ideas. Very risky, but also it might give you something that's very, very different. Okay, so I'm just going to give some quick examples here, my reaction to financial services. So we're talking about products and services now, and I wanted to think about some new products and new services in the financial services sector. So here, my thing is that there are some, they're pretty rare, and I'll explain why in a minute. But if you just think about, in general, what are sort of new products and services that you see here, they expand the offerings, and they enable companies to move beyond table stakes, basically the Red Queen effect. In other words, that you just need to keep investing in process innovations to make yourself more efficient, and everybody has to do that. So these go beyond efficiency in some ways. So these are relatively, I would say, more or less minor things, like your financial services advisor, having a trading bot for financial transactions. That's actually a very interesting service that companies provide. Peer-to-peer payments, open banking. I think these are actually quite, ticking off quite well. And digital know your customer onboarding. I mean, you probably noticed, being able to sign up for a digital bank versus a traditional high street bank. For me, I did it in 5 minutes or something like that, using my phone, take a selfie, or even sometimes they make you go onto a video link and hold up your passport, and then they give you the account like that. And then I had tried to get one, I won't say the name of the bank, but come to our office. Okay, go to the office, it's closed. I go to the website, gives me a phone number, you have to go to the bank. Okay, so I go back to the bank, and they were like, we're not accepting appointments. You have to make an appointment with us, so can you come back in 2 weeks now? So I went back 2 weeks later, And then they sent me back one more time, and I finally got the bank account. It took like literally a month to get this account. So, this is something that's actually, very useful, and it's something that I think that banks need to pay more attention to. I think they are paying attention now. Most big banks are trying this at least, or trying to do something here. But the ones that aren't are in, it's going to be tough to attract new customers if they're not interested in doing anything like that. Okay, moving on, new processes. So the first one is, automation incumbents. So, this is sort of like, process innovations make you more efficient, right? Here's some example, computer vision applied in factories, chatbots, asset tracking, things like this that basically reduce your costs. Remote diagnostics, expense report automation, things like this. And here in the financial services sector, I would say this is what the priority has been, right? So most financial services firms are trying to get their costs down and trying to become as efficient as possible. Example, I would just use this one example here, credit card fraud detection. It's a great example because basically, if something happens, it just happened to me the other night, I tried to buy a plane ticket to go from Taipei to Bangkok, and it was only available on, Thai Viet Airlines, okay? So I got on there. Boom, my credit card company cut me off like this, there's fraud. Is it okay? I had to go on my app and say, yes, it's me, And then they were like, fine, do it again. And I put it through, and it worked. So this is not changing the payment system of the world. This is just making credit card companies more efficient and saving them money because now they don't have to be on the hook for fraudulent payments. So they're using different kinds of digital technologies to make those predictions. And this is the famous picture of supply chain 4.0. It's happening, it's happening now. It's difficult to get everybody in your supply chain on the same IT system, that's for sure. But this visionary thing is actually happening quite a bit, sort of forecasting and planning. That was all an old hat. But then linking that with the factory and having demand predictions, predictive shipping. Amazon already has a patent on it 8 years ago. So expect to get some packages pretty soon that you didn't even search for. Finally, let's look at new business models. And thinking about new business models here, this is some little examples of some of the papers I've written in the past. So basically thinking about how you're creating value, how you're capturing value in a company. So describing that sort of process. And another work that I had with Lorenzo Massa here, we were thinking about any firm could have its first business model. We call that business model design. Or you could have your second or later business model, and some of them could be like GMAC, that's the financing arm of General Motors. They gave loans to people to buy cars. Simple. Banks existed already, not so innovative, but innovative for them because it was an additional business model for them, which is, by the way, the most profitable unit of General Motors for many decades. I don't know if it is still anymore. And then you've got, you've got iTunes here, which we think of as like the first business model of its kind in industry. So trying to set up a kind of digital rights management for music. And they were quite successful with that. Or even in the case of business model design, you have your Metro, your free newspapers, that they give you for commuters. So those are kinds of ideas that companies, that you might have for coming up with new business models. And, thinking about these investments in digital, and of course, we all know about servitization, we all agree, having sensors, and then, making subscription services is interesting. It's definitely something that you can do. And, having it's like a Cemex, service guarantee, Rolls-Royce, Caterpillar, et cetera, these big companies. The one I wanted to show you, to point out just for now, I think is quite interesting, is this one about the drones. So basically sending out a drone that inspects a building after an event, after a flood or an earthquake or whatever, and having automatically analyze the pictures of the building and then paying, and then so the business model is actually, the business model innovation is in insurance. So the insurance company then pays the claim immediately. And imagine how much you'd be willing to pay. I mean, I don't know, if you didn't have to hassle with the, going through the claims and sending out an inspector 3 months later, so they're actually able to raise the margin on their insurance products because they have this sort of automated system that they've created because of digital technologies. So it's kind of an interesting example. There's also a bunch of things happening in the metaverse, which I think are quite interesting and will continue to be Very interesting in the future. So last thing I want to talk about today in the last few minutes here is strategy versus execution, so avoiding problems with when you're doing these sorts of things. Here we're taking visionary, we're saying, oh, do this, do that. Isn't it great? Yes, come up with a new business model. Add a new business model. Perfect. It sounds great. The only problem is there's lots of problems with it. So the first thing to say is building a culture of experimentation and innovation is critical. So I've just written down a few ideas here. New services, trying hackathons with your employees, having a corporate new venture group, making a spin-off, a spin-out, having a digital lab, going to executive education, pooling data with ecosystem partners. So lots of things that you can do to try and create some kind of culture of innovation in the company. And this is just another paper that I have with Henry Chesbrough here, where we were trying to understand how does it work with your business model reconfiguration. A startup company does their business model design, they do pivots, and then they basically fix and scale their business model. Whereas incumbents are already here. They're already scaled. And so the hard part is trying to come up with something new that also can help diversify you in one way or another, as we discussed at the beginning. So that involves some kind of business model reconfiguration, which means you need to add or replace a business model. And what causes this could be technological change. That's what we're talking about right now, the main thing, digital technologies. It could be industry maturity, it could be shocks, there could be lots of other things. This is a paper that I have with Chin-Li Lu right now that we're just working on, which is showing an example of how Hema Fresh, which is like a spin-off from Alibaba, so they basically created a fresh food delivery business. And then basically we're trying to understand how the activity changes, how the value proposition changed, and how this digital channel, because they basically make an online and offline simultaneous channel. That was their value proposition. And so we're trying to go through this and understand how their revenue streams change, how their cost structure changed, and then how that changed their value creation exercises in the first place. So something to think about. On the other hand, the typical challenges here is that there are many barriers, and I worked on this a lot with Lorenzo Massa, with Gigi Viscusi, with Henry Chesbrough, basically thinking about what are some of the structural impediments. So in other words, I'm a manager, I don't want to have a new business model because that'll cut into the number of people who report to me or something like that. They're rational. It's not an irrational thing because I'm thinking about myself as the manager. Other sorts of things is complexity, how many different variables can you manipulate to have your new business model, how interconnected and complex they are. So there are lots of things happening, and there's also frictions caused by corporate ventures. And if I were just to say, here are some minimum ones. So basically, the idea goes, you should be running experiments. We all agree. Now, what happens when you run these experiments? You make a minimum viable product. That's typically what you do. Well, guess what? Quality organization hate minimum viable products because they might give you a bad name, or someone might say, oh, that's low quality item. Use of the brands, bypassing the procurement process, this is the kind of typical stuff where there's lots of friction and it can cause problems when you're trying to come up with a corporate venture that has some traction in the market. So the startup fights the battle in the market, that's clear, but the big company corporate venture fights two battles. They fight the battle in the market, just like the startup company, but they also fight the internal battle for resources. And so it's a very tricky thing. So the lean startup process inside a large corporation, it can work, but you have to kind of navigate around, minimize the number of times you need to go upstairs to get permission, because every time you ask for permission, there's a good chance they'll say no, and then you're done. I just made a list here. Anybody wants to see my list. I'm not going to go through these papers. We don't have any time. But basically, I'm working on a lot of different other things right now in this space of digital technologies and what's happening in the digital space. So let me just say that this digital disruption, it's a distinct possibility. The companies are not doomed to failure. So I think that's a key point here. They need to develop new products, services, processes, business models. You need to nurture a culture of experimentation and continuous innovation. And then, acknowledge there may be internal resistance. So don't wait for a crisis. Now, if I'm just going to say a last couple words about a couple other projects and say a couple words of thank you. So Paula mentioned I'm also working on the Center for Digital Transformation. I'm an academic director of it. And, our idea here is to, have insights, so gather the latest trends, develop talent to do research, engaging with companies and organizations of all kinds. and then make some convening access to networks, pre-competitive, to have companies come together and learn from each other. So, and in fact, tomorrow we will have an industrial forum. If anyone wants to come, it'll be in Scale Space in the afternoon. And we will do a hackathon this weekend for digital transformation for anybody who wants to come and work on digital transformation projects. So here's our team here, and Mirna Flores and David Schreier, Gigi Viscusi, Ivo Naftika. And it's a pleasure working with them. We've been working for almost 2 years now on getting this center off the ground. And then finally, I want to mention IX here. This is the new campus concept in artificial intelligence, data, and digital. I'm one of the co-directors of it. Eric Gateman, who's here today, is the chairman of the board. And then Peter Pietzuk is in computer science. He's the co-director for research. Nick Jones is in mathematics. And he's the co-director for engagement. And Alex Gibbs is the operations manager. And again, a wonderful group. We are moving into new space in White City in iHub. We should probably have a fairly substantial number of people moving in there by the end of this year once the renovation of the building is done. And so our idea is to come up with new models for research and teaching and to have innovative industry engagement. Let me just finish up by saying thanks. Thanks to all of you for coming today. I'd like to thank Francisco Veloso, Paula Criscuolo, and Annabelle Gower, who are going to speak in a few minutes. My colleagues in the Management and Entrepreneurship Department, as well as the Center for Digital Transformation, and my colleagues in IX. My co-authors here, I just had Google Scholar tell me the ones that are the most popular with me, I guess. Alan Afua, because I figured I only had 41 slides, and if I had to write them all down on a slide, I'd have 80 slides. So, Alan Afua, Lorenzo Massa, Andrew King, Gian Vito Lanzola, Luca Berchici, Iftikhar Assad, Mary Tripsis, Henry Chesbrough. My current former PhD students, always challenging me. And I just want to also recognize my family here. Here's a picture of my dad, who unfortunately died many years ago. And there's my mom here, my sisters and brothers, and then here are my kids enjoying fondue. And this is my wife, Carolyn, who is here tonight, so I'm very grateful. And she's also made some professional sacrifices so I can be here tonight making this, So I ended up here tonight making this speech, so that's very nice. And here we are. And if you will notice, this is somewhere between that first inaugural lecture that I made and tonight, and I am indeed wearing the same shirt. I can't believe it that it was like the first thing I found in my photo, so. I do own more than one shirt. Anyway, let me stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for such an engaging lecture. Now it's time for Q&A, either online or in person. We have some microphone as well, so if you raise your hand.
Great, here's some questions here. I'll repeat, if you shout it out for now, I'll repeat the question, otherwise we'll get you a microphone. But here's a microphone here for you. And another microphone you give to that person here.
My name is Daulat. I came from Kazakhstan. And I just would like to add two samples that could be very helpful for you. I think you know the startup Flood and Flush insurance company. They made detectors that measures the level of the water that affects to the house. And measuring this level of the water, they count the payments for insurance claims. So they not know the same day.
That's a great example.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another example in Kazakhstan, when the GovTech government technology goes faster than the market, and even in UK you have the DocuSign that you may make documents online. In Kazakhstan we get mortgage in 1 day. If you find an apartment, you just make it everything online because banks connected to the government and all the data is collected at the government. And GovTech works very good. And everything you need just to get the permission to get the information from the government. So you just send SMS to the client and he says, yes, I'm in this contract. And he confirms some OTP or something like that. Mm-hmm. And all the data is collected from the old databases and contract is ready. Even the solicitors, is online. So the only thing people would like to come and shake hands. And that's the only problem right now in Kazakhstan, why it takes one day, because we have to give them a place and do something like that. Yes. And yes, that's two topics.
Yeah, that's a very interesting example. Actually, the only thing I could add to that would be this use of blockchain for property registries, which I think is quite an interesting application. It's also quite natural for blockchain because since houses only turn over once every 7 to 10 years, it's not something that would, that would be a very difficult thing to store in a blockchain. And that would also give you clear title to add to your already super efficient process that you have in Kazakhstan. I won't tell you how long. Actually, I never even got a mortgage, to be honest. That's how long it took here. So I mean, I don't know. I won't go into that detail. Yes.
I've actually got a question, which is, have you seen examples of digital disruption changing not so much business models, but how corporate models work? So, i.e. the function of a corporate. And I asked that in the context, I've got a 15-person scale-up in, we're doing machine learning in the aerospace and defense. Okay? We could I don't really care about the company construct. I care about paying those people's wages, and we can morph into a 5-person company or a 30-person. We effectively do that through collaborations. And I just wondered if the whole construct of a single entity corporate will get disrupted through digital disruption, and are there examples of that?
So you're thinking more like a distributed firm or something like that. The virtual organization, actually I was talking to Gigi about the virtual organization today. The virtual organization, is that what you're referring to? Or are you referring to just improving the processes?
And I think also, is there a case of your job running a business is sort of, in the modern world, is kind of possibly making enough rather than making supercharged profits for shareholders. Therefore, does that change the whole construct of what you're trying to do?
I don't have recent insight into this, but I actually did write a paper on this topic. And so basically, in the paper, we are arguing that you've got communications, which makes it easier to have a hierarchy. It makes it easier to have a hierarchy rather than less. And yet you've got also other factors that go in that make it easier to, say, sell off a unit of your company or something like that. So the question is, you can make it so you can do streamlining. So that's the part where, internally you could have better, processes in place, travel expense reports, all these sorts of things. And those things are going to be the same. So the question is, empirically speaking, is it better to get rid of all these units and become a more focused organization and maybe just use digital technologies just to communicate back and forth? Or does it enable you to actually expand your scope? And what we found in surveys with execs, this is 10, 15 years ago, I'd have to look at it now, but these actually the companies were actually expanding their scope. They were not becoming, more individualistic entities. So it's an open question, and it might be different now with new technology now, but I would say, specifically with, conferencing technology and things like this. But right now, I feel like we're not quite to the perfect market yet where everyone brings their labor, and then you pay them for whatever they did, and on a spot contract or something like that. I think we're quite far from that, but you never know. Maybe at some point it'll happen. Dimitri.
Hello, my name is Dimitri. I'm from ETH Zurich and also visiting research at the Imperial. I have one question about technology diffusion. How to enable technology diffusion for productivity growth? At least for the last 30 years, we've been seeing productivity slow down in major economies. And one explanation might be that we don't measure productivity right. Another explanation is that there is a growing technology gap between frontier firms and the rest of the economy. So from your research or from your participation in several initiatives like Center for Digital Transformation and Imperial X, how to enable technology diffusion in the entire economy to support productivity growth?
Okay, it's a very good question. So basically, he's saying that, how can we get better productivity out of digital technologies? Because up until now, there's been a lot of famous work, Eric Brynjolfsson, et cetera, has done all this work on the productivity paradox, which is that we seem to be getting more and more high tech, and yet our productivity in most industrialized countries has actually been dropping, to maybe not so much lately. There's a lot of noise lately. I don't know if I have a good answer to how to fix the productivity problem in general, but I can tell you that one thing that we are working on right now, we just submitted a grant to the Hartree Center for the National Center for Digital Innovation to do an engagement hub. Even if we don't win the grant, somebody's, there'll be multiple of these hubs, spokes all over the UK, and the idea is to bring companies on board and to help them diffuse and use digital technologies using a variety of methods, including educational component, hackathons, et cetera. So I think there's some groundswell efforts in these areas that might help a little bit with diffusion, but I think a lot of it has to do with people not wanting to change, And so people don't want to change, they don't want to adopt these things. They don't want to adopt these things, it's actually, get to a situation where they wait for a crisis. They wait for a crisis, so on average, what's the productivity there? So I think that you're right. This gap between the first tier and the last tier is probably growing.
So maybe just one question, because I'm mindful
yes,
of,
online
of
question.
time.
Yes, I think we have to, I think we can take one more question here.
Okay. So this is a long question with two parts.
Okay.
So
I'll try.
how can organizations better align servitization strategies with innovative digital technologies? More concretely, in the integrated urban regeneration research field, the concept and developments around city digital twin will offer a wide range of opportunities, for instance, to city infrastructure managers or municipal services.
Okay, so what's the question?
So the question is how to design.
I agree 100% with that comment.
So maybe what's the future of servitization strategies?
Servitization strategy. So here the idea is to take a service and bundle it onto, whatever products you're doing, or shift completely from selling products to making into a subscription model or something like that. So that would be like a servitization. So the point is, how can we, what's the process that you need to have to put in place to do that? So here I would say this is a perfect example of business model experimentation, like we said, like a corporate venture, trying different elements out on it. Obviously, the price of sensors is dropping. And so, the point is that as these things become cheaper, it becomes a lot easier to servitize, whatever you're doing, and to try and do. So basically, my only answer would be the same answer as I had before, which is that you need to run experiments. You need to try business model experiments, and hopefully get past some of these frictions that I mentioned to try and get out there and test new models to see what works in your particular industry, taking advantage of specifically Internet of Things in general. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Now, if I can welcome Annabelle Gower. It's a pleasure to see you. Annabelle was also at Imperial, so it's an ex-colleague. It's a pleasure to see you again. Annabelle is professor in digital economy. You're also the director of CERI, Center of Digital Economy. Thank you for coming back to Imperial and giving your vote of thanks to Chris.
Thank you, Paola. Chris, congratulations. It's a real joy and an honor to be here today. I think you all got a bit of a flavor, of a taste, of just what a remarkable, spectacular scholar and human being Chris is. I've had the pleasure to know Chris for almost 30 years. We did our PhD at MIT, at the Sloan School of Management, and we actually share a supervisor, Professor Michael Cusumano. And I actually met Chris before he met me. Let me explain to you how that happened. And actually, Chris played a role, a not insignificant role, in my embarking into the career that I'm in now. I was working in industry, had been trained as an engineer in France, was working in industry for 4 years and aspired to become an academic. And I visited MIT and grabbed an application form. And there was a booklet describing the PhD in management at the Sloan School. And every specialty had a page. And there was one page, I remember vividly, one page describing the program in management and technology called innovation. And there was one photograph of a current student, a very smiling, very curly-haired, twinkly-eyed student, Chris Tucci, who spoke a bit about himself, about how he had studied at Stanford. He also loved music and why he loved this program. And I looked at that, and the description of the program, and I thought, this sounds like an amazing program. And so I applied to that program, and here we are, quite a few years later. So that's my first thanks to you, Chris. Now, in the spirit of crowdsourcing, and you've heard that, that Chris, who has always been really looking at very interesting topics, being ahead of the curve. I think we can look at the major topics in which he has been a pioneer, and there's quite a few of them. He was one of the very first person to look at internet business models, and he wrote with Alain Afua an extremely popular textbook called Internet Business Model. He's a major voice in business model innovation, a major actor also in innovation in general, but also open innovation. Digitalization, he was one of the very first ones to write about it. Digital transformation, well, this is what he does now. Who knows what he will do in 5 years' time, but if you want to know where the future is going, look at what Chris is doing, because he's already there. And so a few words that come to mind when you think about Chris Tucci is, ahead of the curve, creativity, curiosity, leadership, but also enthusiasm, generosity, and joy. He is one of the most joyful person that you will meet, and it is not fake. And this is incredible, and I think that's why Chris is admired, respected, and so many people want to collaborate with him. And so in the spirit of crowdsourcing, I thought I'm going to ask a few people who I know and have worked with Chris what they think about Chris. And some of those names you've seen as collaborators. I'll start with the shortest line, Alain Afua. Chris is a true scholar and gentleman and a remarkable co-author. Then we've got Gianvito Lanzola, who is here, right there, professor of strategy at Base Business School. Chris' wealth of knowledge, his multidisciplinary insight, and his irony shape an inspiring experience for anyone who has the privilege to work with him. Whether one needs to complete a paper revision due yesterday, of course, chair a workshop, or develop a new research project, Chris's energy is contagious and helps you overcome any hurdle, even the tallest. Thank you, Chris. Just two more citations from very special people. One, Henry Chesbrough himself, so the father of the open innovation, whole stream of literature. Chris is like me, from Michigan, and is also like me, now far away from where he grew up. He brings joy and enthusiasm to his work wherever he is in the world. He has a sixth sense for important questions and has the talent and patience to do the hard work to make real headway against the important challenges he has undertaken. I know that because I also co-organized a conference with Chris, the first Academy of Management special conference outside of the United States. We co-chaired that conference on digital. And we had 400 people come from 40 countries, and I got the chance to see what a force he is to just overcoming this obstacle with a smile and rallying people on board. Just to finish Henry's input, Henry says, I have co-authored with him, I have planned conferences with him, I have shared doctoral students with him, and I will happily collaborate again with him anytime, any place. The very last site I want to give is from Anita McGann, who is a university professor at the University of Toronto and is a former president of the Academy of Management. I agree with every word she says. Chris Tucci is an inspired and inspiring leader who has done 1,000 things that nobody knows about to make our community flourish. If somebody good has happened to you lately, it's likely that Chris was behind it in some quiet but instrumental way. On top of that, he's a great collaborator, scholar, friend, and educator. Huge thanks, Chris, for all you do for all of us, Anita, and I would say, and Annabelle. That's all I've got for you here. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. I think you said it all. You really interpreted Chris very well. didn't know. But the generosity came up also in what you said, but also what the other professor said. You're amazing, Chris. Thank you for this inspiring and very interesting inaugural lecture. Now I think there is some nibbles and drinks outside. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for being online as well. And let's continue the conversation outside. Thank you very much.
Great, well, thank you very much for that.